Two men go missing under similar circumstances in Naples, Florida. Both men were last seen being arrested by a deputy in the Collier County Sheriff's Department for driving without a license. Neither made it to the jail, with the deputy claiming to have changed his mind about both arrests and dropping the men off at Circle K convenience stores instead. Collier County Sheriff's Office has classified both men as missing and endangered, citing that both men were last seen in the company of a now-fired CCSO deputy. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jolynn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. These are the stories of Terrance Williams and Felipe Santos. Today's story starts with Felipe. Felipe was born on January 1st, 1979, in the small town of Oaxaca in Mexico. He moved to Immokalee in Florida in the year 2000 so he could work and send money back to his family in Mexico. Felipe frequently called home to his parents. He was known for being quiet and polite. He had a fiancée, Apolina, and a baby daughter that he loved being a father to. Felipe didn't go out much, with a friend saying he was most often seen going to and from work or the laundromat. Felipe worked hard, and he was saving up his money. On October 14, 2003, Felipe was driving to work at a concrete and masonry company with his brothers when his white Ford Tempo collided with a Mazda driven by Camille Locke. The two drivers pulled into the parking lot of a nearby gas station. It is reported that one of Felipe's brothers tried giving Camille cash in an attempt to stop her from calling the police, but she did not accept this and followed through with notifying law enforcement of the accident. Deputy Steve Calkins arrived at the scene at 6:55 a.m. and quickly determined the crash was Felipe's fault. Witnesses would later disagree on who caused the crash or exactly how it happened. Camille would later report that Deputy Calkins had been upset, explaining, quote, "He just said he was tired of this type of situation, someone getting in an accident and not having insurance or license." Camille noted that the deputy had raised his voice a little. Deputy Calkins cited Felipe for reckless driving and driving without a license or insurance, and placed him in his patrol car. Deputy Calkins later reported that he was not angry with Felipe, but rather appreciated how polite and cooperative he was being. The deputy decided to give Felipe a break, but he didn't want to leave Felipe by his car because he was afraid that Felipe would drive off, something he'd seen others do in the past. Calkins explained, quote, "I went down just a few blocks away to the Circle K store located on Immokalee Road and Winterview Drive. Once there, I brought the driver outside and we talked. I issued him his citations and I gave him a copy of the crash report. And I gave him back his car keys and I explained to him to not drive his car anymore until he could get a valid driver's license." There is no evidence that Felipe ever arrived at the Circle K, and it's not understood why the deputy would even drive him there. Felipe and his brothers were not far from work, and their foreman was on the way to pick them up. Later that day, Felipe's boss contacted the county jail to post bail, but it was discovered that Felipe was never booked. At 7:35 a.m., Deputy Calkins reported clearing the call, meaning he was no longer handling the crash. However, Camille and a brother of Felipe reported seeing the deputy leave much earlier, just after 7 a.m. Camille told investigators that the deputy had already left with Felipe by the time she left around 7:05 a.m. He later reported that he went to a morning briefing at the sheriff's substation after that, but it's not clear from the records whether anyone saw him there that day. According to dispatch records, from 7:59 to 8:19 a.m., Deputy Calkins reported that he was doing extra patrol at Site 123, otherwise known as Naples Park Elementary School. A dispatcher later came forward to share her skepticism with this claim, saying, quote, "You can be gone as long as you want, and nobody's going to question it, and nobody's going to try to dispatch you either. So yes, it's a convenient way to go off the grid." At 8:53 a.m., the deputy reported to dispatch that he had arrived at North Collier Hospital, where he took a report about an underage girl giving birth. Investigators found it likely that he was in fact at the hospital. Strangely, available dispatch records for the deputy on the day that Felipe disappeared only cover the time from 6:45 a.m. to 11:19 a.m., less than 5 hours' time and nowhere near his full shift. A spokesperson for the agency did not have an answer as to why the deputy only worked a partial shift that day, saying, quote, "We have provided all records we have regarding this. What the deputy did that day after 11:19 a.m. is unknown." If Calkins really did leave the crash at 7:35 that morning, he had an hour and 18-minute window before he arrived at the hospital. However, given witness accounts, it's much more likely that the deputy had a window of an hour and 48 minutes during which his whereabouts and activities could not be determined with certainty. The former federal prosecutor spoke of that time frame by saying, quote, "That period of time is probably the most vital period of time to examine and explore. I'm comfortable saying we went over his patrol area, we went over the areas that one could reach in that time period, we dragged lakes, we examined every possible place that he could have reached and gotten to the hospital." On October 29th, 2 weeks after Felipe disappeared, his brother George filed a citizen's complaint against Deputy Calkins. The stated, quote, "Brother lost after 235 put him, Felipe, inside a patrol car. Felipe never got home." 235 is the deputy's badge number. There were some deputies that were known to be frequent flyers when it came to receiving citizen complaints, but Deputy Calkins was not one of them. The complaint was looked into by Sergeant Doug Turner. On November 4th, 3 weeks after Felipe's disappearance, the sergeant interviewed Deputy Calkins and found his story to be a little strange. Sergeant Turner recalled, quote, "I could not get Steve to engage me, and just whenever I asked him a question, he would go directly to the report and just start reading from the report or the memo that he wrote. He was pretty much like reading from a book. Instead of just, talking to me, telling me in your own words what happened." Turner recalled wondering why Calkins didn't take Felipe to jail and instead took him to the Circle K. On November 27th, a judge issued a bench warrant for Felipe after he had failed to appear in court for his citations. That same day, Captain Jim Williams reviewed the internal affairs investigation of Deputy Calkins and wrote, quote, "I can find no basis for linking Calkins with the alleged disappearance of Santos. I believe that Calkins' actions in this situation were reasonable, lawful, and proper." On December 2nd, the deputy was exonerated of carelessness in duty performance in the disappearance of Felipe. Just 41 days later, he was back on patrol when he saw Terrance Williams driving an old white Cadillac. Terrance Williams, a native of Chattanooga, Tennessee, was born on January 17, 1976. He had recently moved to Florida to be near his mother, Marcia, and his young son who lived with his mother. They played video games and went to the mall together. Terrance held down 2 jobs, but in his free time, he liked to read about Socrates. Terrance encountered Deputy Calkins in the area of 111th Avenue North and Vanderbilt Drive in North Naples on January 12, 2004. It's impossible for us to know what time Calkins first saw Terrance because he failed to report the traffic stop to dispatch as it was happening. Terrance's roommate had become worried when Terrance failed to come home, so he emailed his concerns to Terrance's mom, Marcia, on January 13th. The Williams family called police to file a missing persons report. Marcia had called local jails and hospitals trying to find Terrance. Shortly after, Terrance's aunt was able to track down his Cadillac, which had been towed from Naples Memorial Cemetery after being found obstructing traffic. The tow report was signed by Deputy Steve Calkins. The family contacted the sheriff's department and learned the deputy had not filed an incident report, nor had he made an arrest. Marcia contacted employees at the cemetery who told her that they witnessed Deputy Calkins pull Terrance over and ask him for identification, which he didn't have. They watched as the deputy pat down Terrance before putting him in the back of his patrol car. Before driving off with Terrance, Deputy Calkins asked the cemetery employees if he could leave the Cadillac in the lot. The deputy was witnessed returning to the cemetery between 15 minutes and an hour later. He then moved the Cadillac from a parking spot to the side of the road. The deputy then dropped the car keys on the ground beside the vehicle. Following this witness statement, the Williams family repeatedly called the sheriff's department asking to speak with the deputy. Upon being contacted by dispatch, Deputy Calkins claimed to have no memory of making any arrests or having any cars towed on the day of Terrance's disappearance. He was contacted later and claimed to have somewhat of a better recollection of his contact with Terrance. The deputy's supervisors asked him to submit an incident report. The report states that he first came in contact with Terrance at 12:15 p.m. after seeing the white Cadillac was driving in distress. The report further explained, quote, "The vehicle appeared to be having problems. The driver said he just bought the car and it was not running right." Calkins claimed he followed Terrance to the cemetery parking lot where Terrance asked him for a ride to a nearby Circle K because he was late for work. According to the deputy, after dropping him off at the Circle K, Terrance told him the paperwork for the car was in the vehicle's glove compartment. Calkins claims to have returned to the Cadillac and discovered the proper registration was not in the car. This left him feeling deceived, so he called Circle K from his work-issued cell phone and asked to speak with Terrance. The clerk allegedly told him over the phone that Terrance did not work there, and Calkins then called in the license plate number and found that the plates were expired. Further investigation revealed that phone and surveillance records did not back up Calkins' story. There was no sign of the deputy or Terrance on the surveillance footage from the Circle K, and phone records from Calkins' cell showed no call to the Circle K. Circle K employees were interviewed, and no witnesses could be found to place Calkins or Terrance there. At this point, Marshall filed a complaint against Calkins. A new lead in the case surfaced when the Mexican consulate in Miami contacted Marcia to tell her about another man who had vanished in a similar fashion. The Mexican immigrant Felipe Santos had gone missing 3 months prior after Calkins claimed to have dropped him off at another Circle K, approximately 4 miles from the location where he claimed to have dropped off Terrance. The disappearances of Terrance Williams and Felipe Santos were now connected. Since the main person of interest in the case was a police officer, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the FBI were called in to work on the case. They used various investigative techniques, including covert placement of a GPS device in the deputy's vehicle, a forensic investigation of the patrol car, and cadaver dogs, which were used to survey the areas identified by the GPS, as well as searching the woods and waters near where the missing men were last seen. Despite their efforts, these techniques turned up no further evidence. Investigators found nearly 24 untruthful or inconsistent statements that Deputy Calkins made about the day he met Terrance. For example, the cemetery employees recalled the stop happening at 9 or 10 a.m., a claim which is seemingly supported by the fact that Terrance's shift that day was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. Further suspicion was cast when a recording of the deputy's call to dispatch requesting the tow of Terrance's car revealed further conflicting statements. Sometime after noon that day, Calkins returned to the cemetery to have the Cadillac towed away. At 12:49 p.m., he placed a recorded call to dispatch, and it was answered by Dave Jolicoeur, a patrol deputy. Calkins requested the VIN run, saying, quote, "I got a homey Cadillac on the side of the road here. Signal 11, signal 52. Nobody around." Signal 11 meant the car was abandoned, and signal 52 meant it was disabled. Neither description was true. Calkins joked with the operator, saying, quote, "Maybe he's out here in the cemetery. Maybe he will come back and his car will be gone." Calkins' statements in this call to dispatch contradicted both his incident report and the witness statements, both of which report that Calkins himself moved the vehicle to its location blocking the road. Calkins insisted he moved the car to assist the towing company as opposed to attempting to make the car look abandoned. The deputy also claimed in the recording that the car was disabled, which Terrance's family objects to as a family member drove the car home from the tow yard. Calkins was later reprimanded for conduct unbecoming of a law enforcement officer, with the call being described as, quote, further inducing suspicion. Calkins initially defended his statements to the operator, saying he was just joking around with a coworker, but later admitted in a letter to the sheriff that his words were in poor taste. Approximately 20 minutes later, at 1:12 p.m., Deputy Calkins requested a background check on Terrance, providing an inaccurate birth date, a specific date that Terrance had previously given the police when he was arrested. This date of birth was not written on any official documents that Calkins could have found, so it is believed that he made contact with Terrance a second time. Calkins denies this, but has trouble explaining how he got the new information about Terrance. He reported during the first interaction that Terrance only provided his first name, there was no documentation in the vehicle, and the vehicle wasn't registered. After this call, Calkins was unaccounted for nearly an hour. Dispatch records show a gap of 53 minutes from 1:01 p.m. to 1:54 p.m., in which Calkins did not respond to any calls. However, the gap may be longer as the deputy reported to dispatchers at 1:54 p.m. that he was conducting a traffic stop, and at 2:18 he reported having written a citation. Dispatch records indicate that Calkins called in a license plate. Both times he claimed to be making a stop that day, but investigators never found the citation that he supposedly wrote that afternoon, nor did they find one he supposedly wrote that morning. 5 days before Terrance disappeared, Calkins issued ticket number 9661-CNA, and he issued ticket number 9663-CNA the day after Terrance disappeared. Ticket number 9662-CNA was never turned in by the deputy and has remained unaccounted for. Calkins didn't write many tickets, just an average of one a month. But the day Terrance disappeared, Calkins claimed to have written 2. Both of these questionable traffic stops occurred during time windows in which he could have encountered Terrance. The first at 9:50 a.m., around the time when the cemetery workers said they first saw Terrance and Calkins together. And the second at 1:54 p.m., not long after he called dispatch with the secret false date of birth. Another mystery is the signatures on the 3 traffic citations given to Felipe. On 2 of the tickets, in the space for signature of violator, the middle name appears to be Maximo, and on the 3rd, the signed middle name appears to be Medino. Neither of those are Felipe's actual middle name, Maximino. Along with this, the signatures look nothing like a previous signature found on Felipe's school ID card. These citations were sent to a handwriting expert, but it was determined the signatures were not written by the deputy. It is unclear if the handwriting expert confirmed that they were written by Felipe. Deputy Calkins took 3 polygraph tests, one of which was inconclusive, one of which indicated honesty, and one which indicated deception. During the polygraph test, which Calkins failed, the question that elicited the strongest reaction was Terrance with you when you ran his 4/1/1975 date of birth over your neck still? The second strongest reaction came after the question, after you dropped Terrance at the Circle K, did you have any further contact with him? In August of 2003, 7 months after Terrance disappeared, Deputy Calkins was subsequently fired from the department for providing conflicting information about both missing person cases and for not cooperating with the investigation. The then sheriff, Don Hunter, wrote about the termination, quote, I have lost trust in Calkins and his ability to describe incidents in detail and to recall them. When questioning Deputy Calkins in 2004, Scott Walter said, quote, every time we ask you a question, we have to go back and get clarification. And every time we have to go back and get clarification, it makes you look like you're trying to hide something. And if you're trying to hide this, what else are you trying to hide? Do we got a body laying around in the sticks somewhere that we don't know about? Calkins said nothing, but he laughed. In the previous 10 months, 3 sets of human remains were discovered in the woods on Immokalee Road, which ran from Deputy Calkins' patrol zone in North Naples all the way to Immokalee. 2 were unidentified and remain so to this day. One was Sergio, a man with no known connection to Calkins. Sergio was an undocumented Mexican immigrant who began appearing in sheriff reports from North Naples in 1995. He worked as a dishwasher and a tile setter, among other jobs. In many police reports, Sergio is described as a drunk or intoxicated individual, often on foot, staggering in the road. In 1998, Calkins was listed as the editing supervisor on another deputy's report that described Sergio drunkenly crashing a bicycle into a motor vehicle. The remains included a skull in 2 pieces, scattered vertebrae, and a broken pelvic bone. The skull showed evidence of a gunshot wound, possibly from a .32 caliber bullet. The bones were found a mile away from the Circle K where Calkins claimed to have dropped Felipe. Investigators kept tabs on the former deputy Steve Calkins. Sometime after he was fired from the sheriff's office, he took a job at a local UPS facility where he worked until 2013. It was reported that Steve had caused a minor scene at work and was escorted out. A supervisor noticed packages were getting jammed on one of the conveyor belts where Steve was working. When the supervisor talked to him about it, Steve refused to do what he was told. Instead, he started yelling curses, including some targeted at various coworkers. When he was escorted to an office, he tendered his resignation by writing, "I quit." In 2016, when Steve and his wife sold their house and moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, investigators saw their opportunity to potentially find new leads in the case. With the permission from the new owners of Steve's former home, investigators searched the property. Cadaver dogs searched the property while a ground-penetrating radar was used. Investigators even consulted a forensic anthropologist who analyzes skeletal remains. They found a concrete slab in the backyard where the soil appeared to have settled in an unusual way. A contractor removed the concrete and noticed it was a lesser grade than the concrete elsewhere on the property. In the soil under the concrete, investigators found several pieces of black plastic and a piece of electrical cord. With hopes that this would provide long sought-out answers, the items were sent to an FBI lab for testing. Unfortunately, the investigators were told the items couldn't be tested because it had been underground for too long, and their texture wasn't conducive to retaining DNA. The search of the yard was yet another dead end. Felipe and Terrance's disappearances have been covered by multiple television shows such as Investigation Discovery series Disappeared and Never Seen Again. Tyler Perry has offered a $200,000 reward for any information leading to the location of the men or an arrest in the case. Despite these efforts, the case remains cold. On August 30th, 2018, a wrongful death lawsuit was filed against Steve Calkins. Unfortunately, the suit missed a filing deadline to ask for a trial, so the judge dismissed the case. The legal team of the victims' families said the COVID-19 pandemic caused inter-office confusion that led to the missed deadline, but a Florida appeals court upheld the dismissal. In 2020, Calkins' attorney took a deposition from Marsha Williams. Later in 2020, the case entered a non-binding arbitration, with the arbitrator ultimately entering a non-binding judgment in favor of Calkins. Marsha's legal team attempted to appeal, but a judge dismissed the case and ruled that Marsha had to pay Calkins around $5,600 for costs related to the lawsuit. Many have cited the Starlight Tour as a popular theory for the disappearances. The term originated in a Canadian province, Saskatchewan, and describes the practice of police driving individuals to the edge of town or outside of city limits and abandoning them to find their own way home. The practice came to light in 2000 when an Indigenous Canadian man named Daryl Knight reported being picked up by police after leaving a party, driven to the outside of town, and then dropped off in a rural area in freezing conditions. Daryl survived after finding a nearby power plant staffed by security guards. The next morning, another indigenous man named Rodney Nastis was found frozen to the ground where Daryl was dropped off. Lawrence Wagner, also indigenous, was found deceased weeks later in the same area. According to Russ Sabo, Saskatoon's new police chief, evidence exists that similar drop-offs have gone on since at least 1970. Many believe Deputy Calkins was giving Felipe and Terrance the Starlight Tour. A big lingering question within former deputies is if Steve Calkins killed Terrance Williams and Felipe Sergio. Many have come out publicly to share their doubts as the bodies haven't been found. Others have come forward with their beliefs that the deputy is responsible. One former dispatcher is quoted saying, "I think he's guilty as sin." Charles Peterson, a former colleague of Steve, made several statements indicating he believed the deputy was guilty, including, quote, "I tell you, if Steve was capable and did do it, he would definitely make sure that the body would never be found." One day, without being asked, he blurted out, quote, "Do I think Steve Calkins is racist? Yeah. I think he disliked Mexicans, and I think he disliked blacks. Do I think they're alive? No. I think they're dead. And do I think Steve might have been involved? Good possibility. Is there evidence? No. Why? Because they never arrested him. Could he be a hidden monster inside? Yeah, he could be." Recordings from Calkins' interviews were released, including one clip where Steve seemingly didn't know he was being recorded. He states, quote, "I'm not going to get drugged through the mud no more because a couple of scumbags are missing." Terrance and Felipe were alike in the fact that they both had big dreams. Terrance was a skilled barber who had dreams of one day opening up his own barber shop. Felipe's dreams were to get ahead and to have a home where he lived with his family. Two dreams that were stopped short by the men's unexplained disappearances. So, what do you think happened? Were Felipe and Terrance taken on a Starlight Tour by Deputy Calkins? Thank you for listening to Without a Trace with your host, Jolene. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the disappearances of Felipe Sergio and Terrance Williams. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and follow us on social media. Join me next week as I dive into another case.